afternoon. My name is Brodee Landry with the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. I've been with them for 6 years. I'm an alligator program biologist. That is me right there with a leucistic alligator at Rockefeller Refuge. That was when I started about 6 years ago, 2 kids ago. Some topics I want to cover today, because most people think that the alligator program is what they see on Swamp People, but there's a lot more to it. I'm going to introduce you to the American alligator, just a brief history of them, history of the Louisiana alligator program, how it started, why it started, and give you some info on alligator farming, the wild harvest, and our nuisance program. She looks like she's happy right there, but she's really not. That picture was taken by me a few years ago while picking eggs from her nest. The alligator is no longer listed as an endangered species. A lot of people still believe that they are, but they are giving a TSA designation by CITES, which is because TSA stands for threatened due to similarity of appearance. So because they have a similar appearance to other endangered crocodilians, they are protected and monitored under CITES. The range of the American alligator goes all the way from South Texas, surprisingly all the way up to North Carolina. And they could also be found all the way to the southern tip of Florida. And that is the only place in the world where you can encounter alligators and crocodiles in the same region. Where can we expect to see them around here? Yes, lakes, rivers, bayous, swamps, marshes, ponds, ditches, canals, a pothole if it's big enough. They're everywhere. And the reason that they're able to live in such a broad range of habitats and persist is because they're extremely adaptable. They have mechanisms to deal with all types of environments that we have in Louisiana. You may see them in your swimming pool, crossing the road, in your backyard, but normally when you see them during those times, it's because they're moving from one habitat to another. If the water's high, they're going to be moving. If the water's low, they're going to be moving to another place with higher water. And they're also going to move to breed. So that's when they'll travel. What do we want to do if we see an alligator? Well, we would always like you to keep a safe distance. If you're not used to alligators, which not many people are used to handling alligators, you shouldn't get close to them. Don't entice them. People like to throw rocks at them, poke them with a stick just to try and get them to react or something, just to get a video or just, but that's how many of the accidents occur. You never want to try and handle an alligator. I can tell you firsthand, they are very strong and they are very fast. If you pick up a 3-foot alligator thinking that you're going to have complete control of it, you won't. Their teeth are very sharp also. It's also illegal. You never want to feed an alligator, because after you leave, the next person that comes is going to be expecting food from them. And that alligator now becomes a danger and a nuisance. And nuisance alligators that are a danger to pets and humans, it usually doesn't end up so well for the alligator. As long as we respect the alligator's space and they'll respect our space, they're not going to come towards us unless they've been habitually fed. It'll be a much better experience. And I recommend just take a picture of it. I have been doing it for years. I still get excited when I see one on the side of the road on my way to work or on the way to a field office or something. If I see one, I'll stop and take a picture of it. There's an alligator in the road, I'll stop and take a picture of it. This is one in the road directly in front of our Rockefeller office. And you'll tell somebody, I saw an 8-foot gator this morning crossing the road, but I'll believe you if you have an actual picture of it. Our Rockefeller office sustained pretty much a total loss, damage to our office right there in that picture last year during the 2 hurricanes. So we are working out of our new state-of-the-art lab that stayed high and dry. So let's see. Alligator size and growth. So female alligators, you can expect them to grow up to about 9 feet. Sometimes they'll push 10 feet, but that's really pushing it. And I have on here that male alligators can grow up to 15 feet. We don't typically see that, but they do continue growing throughout their whole lifespan. And what it boils down to is we've killed so many of them that we don't see the old ones anymore. We don't encounter them as often. It's possible that they're still out there, but they're still pulling in 13-footers. And, it's not super uncommon. But 15-foot would really be a stretch. And these big monsters all start out at about 6 to 8 inches when they hatch. And they'll grow about a foot a year if they have readily available food. On the other hand, farm-raised hatchlings can grow 3 to 5 feet within their first year or two. I'll touch more on that later. Right here, this is an alligator hatching in my hand about 5 years ago. So he's probably big enough to hurt me now. This is a comparison of a farm alligator versus a wild alligator. They're the same age. They're both about 7 to 8 months old. But the one at the top is captive raised and in a temperature controlled environment, which I'll touch more on later too, in an alligator farm. He doesn't have to compete for food and resources like the smaller one does. But it's just a visual representation of how a different diet and environment can change their growth. So I'll touch on the life cycle. The breeding season occurs from May through June, and during that time, the females will find a suitable area, not too high, not too low. They don't want it to flood, they don't want it to dry out, and they'll pull available nesting material around them into a raised bed that essentially acts as an incubator. As it composts and decomposes, it creates heat, which incubates the eggs. And she'll dig a cavity in the middle of it and deposit, I say 25 to 45 eggs, it varies, in the center, and she'll cover them up. And a lot of times they'll hang around to protect them. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they leave. But when they do stay, they will protect their babies with a vengeance. After about 65 days, which would be about this week, they're going to start hatching. So we're going to have lots of alligators hatching over the next week or two, or over the next month in the state of Louisiana. Let's see. On the left here, you'll see that is one clutch of alligator eggs. One nest with one mother, the eggs are called a clutch. And she is not happy that we took her eggs. She's probably about 7 feet, and they get bigger than that. And faster and more dangerous. But it's kind of hard to tell from here, but each egg is marked on top of the egg to show the orientation that it was laid in the actual nest, because we don't want to rotate the egg at all, because the embryo is attached to the top of the egg. So if we rotate that, it'll detach and it'll kill the embryo. So when we transport the eggs from one place to another to put them in an incubator, we always mark the top of the egg, whether it be with a pencil or a bingo stamper or a little paint marker or something, just to keep them upright. So something interesting about the incubation of alligators is their sex is actually dependent on the temperature at which they're incubated at. So lower temperatures tend to hatch females. Mid-range temperatures, you'll get males. And higher temperatures, 91 degrees and higher, you'll end up with more females, but there'll also be a higher mortality. They're almost cooking at that temperature. So they follow a female, male, female ratio. Whenever they hatch, their diet is anything that they can catch that is small enough to put in their mouth. So they're looking for small insects, tadpoles, frogs, anything that they can grab, dragonflies, and then as they move on to juveniles, I'd say like 2 to 5 feet, they're moving on to bigger frogs, big fish, birds, crabs, snakes, nutria, pets, anything that they can grab. And then adults, I'd say 5 feet and up, they eat all of the above, anything that moves, sometimes things that don't move. Larger mammals, they may try and grab a deer or a hog, something that comes to the water for a drink. And one thing that they really like to eat is smaller alligators. So when that mama is staying at her nest, one thing that she's not just protecting from raccoons and birds, and these babies are small enough to be eaten by a fish whenever they're born. She's also making sure there aren't any big male alligators looking for an easy meal. It's not uncommon to find the web tags, the metal web tags in the stomachs of larger alligators from eating alligators that were released back into the wild, eating smaller ones. So a little history on the alligator program. It has 4 main components. You don't see most of this on Swamp People. Farming is a big component, the wild harvest, the Nuisance program, which many people don't even know exists, and our research and management section. Until 1962, alligator hunting was largely unregulated, which led to the alligator being listed as an endangered species. These are a couple pictures that I found from before there was regulations, telling people how many they could and couldn't, or where they could hunt. This is what led to the alligator being listed as endangered, because there was no model for sustainable use. So all the way back into the 1800s, our ancestors, it was a way of life for them. It was their culture. It was what they did to make money. It was what they did for just to have the resources associated, the meat and stuff. It was just a way of life. But as it became more popular and more popular, and with no regulation, the alligator population towards the mid-1900s declined to where you would once see many alligators, you were lucky to see one. We had some smart people at LDWF back then that decided to close it, to cut it off for 10 years while they developed a model, and they studied the husbandry and the life cycle of the American alligator so that we can better understand how to keep this valuable, renewable resource alive in the state of Louisiana. So in 1972, after all of their efforts, they opened an experimental season in Cameron Parish just to see how it would work, and it was a success. And they later on went to, by 1981, they were able to open it statewide. So that's when hunters started filling out applications and turning in property statewide for us to allocate tags for the whole state of Louisiana. And ever since then, it has been a success. Rockefeller Wildlife Refuge, that is where my office was before the hurricane. It has one of the highest nesting densities of female alligators in the range of the American alligator. So it's made it an invaluable site for research. We have research scientists and researchers from all over the country that visit the refuge to carry out their studies. We have doctors from hospitals and universities that come to do everything from pharmaceuticals to prosthetics. The possibilities are endless. It seems like there's always a new market, and there's always a new product, and there's always something to be had and found from the alligator. This is a picture of me picking eggs. That's what an alligator nest looks like. You can see the cavity in the middle where she deposited her eggs. We always have 2 people in the boat because, when my back's turned to that nest, she could be right under the water right there. She could be in this picture. But, and you can see behind, it's kind of hard to see, but there's a PVC pole in the marsh behind the nest, and that was dropped out of a helicopter. When they spotted the nest, you mark a GPS point and you drop a pole. And you go in the airboat, follow your GPS, and you look for the pole, because the pole will be taller than the marsh grass. So that's just an example of some of the work we do at Rockefeller. Alligator farming. So that is what the hide looks like when it comes off of the alligator. So it's like a flat alligator. They put it on a lighted table, and that will help them see through it because it's translucent, and they can see all the scarring that they get from parasites, insects, fights with other alligators, just the harshness of being an alligator. The fewer scars they have, the fewer imperfections they have, the much higher price they will demand. So You want an alligator that is flawless. So why do we raise them? If we did not raise alligators, most of them would die in the wild. They have a very high mortality rate. Just the eggs themselves have a high mortality rate. We've been having temperatures very high, all these heat waves that are passing through right now that could have baked many eggs that are left in the field. Whenever we have storms, the flood in 2016, a lot of nests went underwater, and they can't stay submerged for very long before mortality raises. So what we do is we capture that resource. It's a valuable, renewable, natural resource that we have to maintain, and it would otherwise be lost to natural mortality, and we take it and we do better than what nature would have been able to do for them. And this in turn provides economic revenue to the landowner that goes back into maintaining the wetland habitat, and that habitat allows farmers to have a source of stock for their farms. So the money that they generate from their farming and from selling the hides goes back into, they have an incentive to put it back into the habitat that the alligators were harvested from or that the eggs were picked from. And in turn, that provides protection for all of the other species that live in those habitats too. So the alligator is also helping us to preserve our wetlands. By us preserving the alligator is helping preserve the wetlands. We also raise them for meat. There's a big market in that. And the hides are made into luxury clothing and goods. Also, little back scratchers and knickknacks that they can make with them that you buy at a gas station or something. That's an example of a couple different types of barns that they'll use for the alligators. We have 55 licensed alligator farmers in the state right now, and their inventory will range statewide from about 700,000 to 900,000 in a given year. It fluctuates with the market sometimes. It also will fluctuate with if we have big weather events and they don't pick up as many eggs. Sometimes they can't even get out there to pick the eggs. So there's a lot of variables in that, but it's typically about 700 to 900,000 in a given year. So where do we get all these alligators that are in the farms? Well, we establish egg quotas, and many farmers, they'll use helicopters to fly over their property where they pick their eggs. They're permitted to pick eggs on certain properties, and they'll fly over and they'll count the nests and they'll mark each one with a GPS point, throw a pole out, and then they'll go and find them with the airboat. And every egg that they pick up is recorded by us so that we know exactly what inventory they have, how many eggs did they pick up, how many hatch, what percentage hatch. We want them to have a high rate, high hatchability. And so once they pick up these eggs, they bring them back to, they have different types of incubators, but they all do essentially the same thing. Most of them are walk-in type incubators where it's a heated room with controlled humidity and temperature. Those are the biggest things. And they may lean towards having a lower temperature so that they have more females hatch, so they can put more nesting females back onto the properties where they took these eggs. So the difference between farm-raised alligators and wild alligators. We saw earlier in the picture how big a farm-raised alligator can be compared to one of the same age taken from the wild. So they sit in temperature-controlled facilities that meet our standards. They have it made. They're fed a high-quality feed made just for alligators to encourage rapid but healthy growth. It almost looks like dog food that floats. It smells a little more. This allows them to grow at an accelerated rate, but in a healthy accelerated rate. And because they don't have to actively hunt and compete like they would in the wild. Those in the wild, they have to compete with other alligators. They have to compete with they have to compete with fish. Fish are looking for the same food as them. Birds are looking for the same food as them. And they have larger alligators looking for them. Because farm-raised alligators are in this laid-back, made-for-them environment, they produce a much better hide. They don't have as many flaws or scarring as compared to wild alligators. Wild alligators will have insect bites. They'll have mosquito bites. That'll leave a mark on their hide. And all those are deducted from the quality of the hide whenever it goes to sale. They'll fight with their prey. They'll fight with other alligators. Sometimes they have leeches on them. They have parasites. They may have disease. We see much less occurrence of that in captive alligators. We conduct controlled releases to the wild each year. We go to each farm, and every alligator farm is required to release a percentage of the eggs that they hatch back onto the properties where those eggs were originally collected. So right now it's 10%. We're moving down to 5% next year that they'll be releasing, just to keep everything, the numbers healthy and stable in the wild. And we go out to the farms and we mark every alligator with a numbered web tag on each of their back feet, and a notch is taken from a specific scale on their tail, which we know there's only one tail notch per year, so we know exactly what year they were released in. And we record the sex, the length, the tail notch, and the web tag number. And each one has an individual web tag number. And with that, if the alligator is ever recaptured in the future, we're able to tell exactly what day it was released on, what farm it came from, what property it was released on, how big it was, and it gives us a look into how they do after we release them. This is an example of an alligator that was released when it was just under 4 feet in 1993. And it was recaptured in September of 2006 at about 12 and a half feet. So that just shows the success that they have. And he still had his web tag. That's the top right picture. In the webbing of their feet, the tag stayed in for that long. And we were able to read the tag number and tell where this alligator was released. And we get many, many of these every year. That was just a good example of a big one. So I'll put that one in there. The wild harvest. That's what most people have knowledge of when it comes to the alligator program. But we license about 2,900 trappers annually, and they bring in about 24,000. It usually evens out around 24,000 alligators harvested annually. They do it it's a culture and a rural lifestyle. Families pass their properties down from person to person, and they'll hunt the same properties for years. We also extended the season from a 30-day season to a 60-day season to allow for more guided hunts. So some guys are, instead of hunting their own property, they're selling these guided sport hunts to share the experience with people that may be out of state or just don't have the opportunity to hunt alligators themselves. They can pay, so they'll pay to come down just to have the Cajun experience, and they'll stay overnight and eat some etouffee and shoot an alligator and take pictures. That's what they want to do. That's what the alligator tags look like. There's a locking mechanism on them. One side goes into the other. They all have a 6-digit number along with the year on them, and it indicates, alligator mississippiensis. That's their scientific name, and that's why it says LAMIS and LA for the state. And that's how we're able to keep track. Every alligator, whether farm or wild, is tagged with one of those tags, and the color of the tag changes every year from yellow to pink to white, and then we rotate those 3 colors. And so we're able to tell what year, and we keep records on every alligator. Where was it caught? Was it sold? Was it sold for the meat? Was it sent to a tannery? We keep track of all that so that we know what our hunters are up to. And all of that is part of our data management. Tag allotments are based on habitat assessment by people like me and the yearly results of our coastwide nest surveys. We fly transects from one side of the coast to the other, from one side of Louisiana to the other, counting nests on all of the different habitats. And with that information, we could see the nesting densities of each habitat and how they change from year to year. And we'll base our tag allotments off of that. Some habitats you may only have to have 80 acres to qualify for one tag. Some you have to have 400 acres to qualify for one tag. It all just depends on our assessment of those habitats and properties. So 69% of the alligators' habitat in Louisiana consists of coastal marshes, and about 22% of it is swamp habitat. Those make up the 2 largest categories as far as alligator habitat in Louisiana. Dewater wetlands, that'll be lands that maybe have been modified by people. They have different drainage. They hold water some parts of the year, not others, but they still have, passageways through them that could be rice ponds, crawfish ponds, but they have canals and ditches and stuff that run through them that are still suitable habitat for alligators. They have a lower tag allotment. They're at 1 to 400 acres right now. And then surprisingly, only 1% of the alligators' habitat in Louisiana is considered lakes. So they don't like to be in open water that much. They would prefer, it's much easier for them to persist in shallower water with they're closer to their prey and they can move around a little more. So our nuisance alligator program, it's important that we have an established nuisance alligator program because we want to safely limit the interaction between people and alligators. The less alligators we have running into people, not during hunting season, the better. So we have 55 hunters statewide, and we receive about 2,500 complaints per year. It goes up and down each year, but it usually levels out around 2,500. And the complaint process, if you have an alligator that's considered a nuisance, you'll make a call to your local LDWF office, and it has to be by the landowner. If you see one in your neighbor's yard, or if you live in a subdivision with a retention pond and you see one in there, maybe your HOA that has to call. But we'll issue you a complaint number, and we will send a local trapper to go and take care of it. Sometimes they get there and the alligator's gone, but they do their best to take care of it. And what happens to these nuisance gators? Sometimes they can be relocated. If they're small, and they're manageable, they can be relocated. But some of them just aren't. It's not a practical option for, Joe the nuisance hunter to go get a 10-foot alligator out of a retention pond by himself. So they'll be humanely dispatched or harvested because they've been around people, especially if they've been fed, been around people, been around pets. If people had pets that go missing, we don't want to go put them somewhere else where they're going to be in the same situation and cause problems for other people. I have a short video. It's about 3 minutes long that I'd like to show. It kind of sums up everything that I've talked about, but it's a little more visual. That's a picture from a helicopter. If you looking down from a helicopter at an alligator nest, they look a lot smaller when you're a lot higher up, though. So they're pretty hard to spot. Sure. Yes, sir.
One of the things I wanted to ask was the normal lifespan of an alligator, number one. And then number two, can you give me an idea, just a quick summary of about what age does a farmer want before they harvest them for their skin, and about how much a 12-foot alligator skin would get at current prices?
Okay. We would probably consider the average lifespan to be, they can live up to 55 to 65 years. And there may be there may be some older ones out there. They typically harvest them around 3 to 5 feet, the size that we release them at. Because the longer you keep them, the more chance there is that they're gonna, get scuffed up, or, they're gonna have flaws on their hide. And it's actually the smaller alligators that are worth more. You're able to make a lot more products with alligators, smaller alligators, because they have smaller scales to work with. So they make a lot of watch bands. You can't make a watch band with a scale that's 2 inches wide. So the smaller farm alligator hides would command a higher price. The larger, we don't really have 12-foot alligators in farms normally, so they would come from the wild, and the price has dropped. I believe it may be around $10 a foot for one that size. But they also make money on the meat also. So yes. Right.
In 1960s, Louisiana faced a major concern as the unregulated harvest of alligators in the early to mid-1900s had led to its being listed as an endangered species. In 1970, the Alligator Management Program was established within the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. The LDWF oversees, manages, and regulates the wild and farm alligator harvest programs. LDWF's goal is to research and improve the alligator species survival. The department has successfully established a scientific management program, which has led to a healthy and stable alligator population. Over the past 48 years, the LDWF has fine-tuned a scientific management program that follows a 5-step cycle. The cycle maintains a healthy and stable alligator population while creating a sustainable farming industry in Louisiana. The cycle starts with a nest survey. Each year, wildlife biologists perform aerial surveys via helicopter to mark nests with GPS coordinates. They analyze data to scientifically validate populations in order to grant egg collection permits and wild harvests. LDWF scientists identify that alligator eggs have a 90% mortality rate in the wild. The decision was made to create a legal agreement between LDWF, landowners, and farmers to collect the eggs and create a regulated farming industry. This agreement ensures that eggs are collected based on the annual nest survey and by certified farmers. LDWF oversees this entire process, and egg collection ensures the survival and continued monitoring of the eggs. As the eggs hatch, Louisiana farmers are responsible for their well-being. Each farmer must prove to LDWF that they are capable to comply with all science-based animal welfare standards established by the government. Farms are subject to regular inspection by LDWF, the state health department, and other government bodies for license operation renewals. Farmers must, by law, release 10% of the alligators back onto the original landowner's property. Once the alligator reaches a minimum of 1 meter, 3 feet, they're released to the original habitat. The farm release is monitored by LDWF. Continued human support of wild alligators through ethical harvest and habitat assessment supports a healthy population and wise use of surplus resources. This 5-step process is repeated each season, ensuring a safe and growing population. The continued success of this conservation cycle has increased the wild alligator population from nearly extinct to over 3 million in the past 30 years. Learn more at LouisianaAlligators.com.
Thank you.